Greetings, listeners, and welcome to the conclusion of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. And I have enjoyed reading the entire book up until this point, and here we are with the finale. Chapter 34, Springing a Secret. Mr. Jones' surprise, a failure. Huck said, "Tom, we can slope if we can find a rope. The window ain't high from the ground." "Shucks, what do you want to slope for?" "Well, I ain't used to that kind of a crowd. I can't stand it. I ain't going down there, Tom." "Oh, brother, it ain't anything. I don't mind it a bit. I'll take care of you." Sid appeared. "Tom," said he, "Auntie has been waiting for you all the afternoon. Mary got your Sunday clothes ready, and everybody's been fretting about you. Say, ain't this grease and clay on your clothes?" "Now, Mr. Siddy, you just tend to your own business. What's all this blowout about anyway?" "It's one of the widow's parties, and she's always having. This time it's for the Welshman and his sons, on account of that scrape they helped her out of the other night. And say, I can tell you something if you want to know." "Well, what?" "Well, old Mr. Jones is going to try to spring something on the people here tonight, but I overheard him tell Auntie today about it as a secret. But I reckon it's not much of a secret now. Everybody knows. The widow, too, for all she tries to let on she don't. Mr. Jones was bound Huck should be here. Couldn't get along with his grand secret without Huck, you know." "Secret about what, Sid?" "About Huck tracking the robbers to the widow's. I reckon Mr. Jones was going to make a grand time over his surprise, but I bet you it will drop pretty flat." Sid chuckled in a very contented and satisfied way. "Sid, was it you that told?" "Oh, never mind who it was. Somebody told. That's enough." "Sid, there's only one person in this town mean enough to do that, and that's you. If you had been in Huck's place, you'd have sneaked down the hill and never told anybody on the robbers. You can't do any but mean things, and you can't bear to see anybody praised for doing good ones. There." "No thanks, as the widow says," and Tom cuffed Sid's ears and helped him to the door with several kicks. "Now go and tell Auntie if you dare, and tomorrow you'll catch it." Some minutes later, the widow's guests were at the supper table, and a dozen children were propped up at little side tables in the same room, after the fashion of that country and that day. At the proper time, Mr. Jones made his little speech, in which he thanked the widow for the honor she was doing himself and his sons, but said that there was another person whose modesty, and so forth and so on. He sprung his secret about Huck's share in the adventure in the finest dramatic manner he was master of. But the surprise it occasioned was largely counterfeit, and not as clamorous or effusive as it might have been under happier circumstances. However, the widow made a pretty fair show of astonishment, and heaped so many compliments and so much gratitude upon Huck that he almost forgot the nearly intolerable discomfort of his new clothes and the entirely intolerable discomfort of being set up as a target for everybody's gaze and everybody's laudations. The widow said she meant to give Huck a home under her roof and have him educated, and then when she could spare the money, she would start him in business in a modest way. Tom's chance was come, he said. "Huck don't need it. Huck's rich." Nothing but a heavy strain upon the good manners of the company kept back the due and proper complimentary laugh at this pleasant joke. But the silence was a little awkward. Tom broke it. "Huck's got money. Maybe you don't believe it, but he's got lots of it. Oh, you needn't smile. I reckon I can show you. You just wait a minute." And Tom ran out of doors. The company looked at each other with a perplexed interest, and inquiringly at Huck, who was tongue-tied. "Sid, what ails Tom?" said Aunt Polly. Well, there ain't ever any making of that boy out. I never." Tom entered, struggling with the weight of his sacks, and Aunt Polly did not finish her sentence. Tom poured the mass of yellow coin upon the table and said, "There, what did I tell you? Half of it's Huck's and half of it's mine." The spectacle took the general breath away. All gazed. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then there was a unanimous call for an explanation. Tom said he could furnish it, and he did. The tale was long, but brimful of interest. There was scarcely an interruption from any one to break the charm of its flow. When he had finished, Mr. Jones said, "I thought I had fixed up a little surprise for this occasion, but it didn't amount to anything now. This one makes it sing mighty small, I'm willing to allow." The money was counted. The sum amounted to a little over $12,000. It was more than any one present had ever seen at one time before, though several persons were there who were worth considerably more than that in property. And let us continue. Chapter 35th, chapter the last. A new order of things. Poor Huck. New adventures planned. The reader may rest satisfied that Tom's and Huck's windfall made a mighty stir in the poor little village of St. Petersburg. So vast a sum, all in actual cash, seemed next to incredible. It was talked about, gloated over, glorified until the reason of many of the citizens tottered under the strain of the unhealthy excitement. Every haunted house in St. Petersburg and the neighboring villages was dissected plank by plank, and its foundations dug up and ransacked for hidden treasure, and not by boys, but men, pretty grave, unromantic men, too, some of them. Wherever Tom and Huck appeared, they were courted, admired, stared at. The boys were not able to remember that their remarks had possessed weight before, but now their sayings were treasured and repeated. Everything they did seemed somehow to be regarded as remarkable. They had evidently lost the power of doing and saying commonplace things. Moreover, their past history was raked up and discovered to bear marks of conspicuous originality. The village paper published biographical sketches of the boys. The widow Douglas put Huck's money out at 6%, and Judge Thatcher did the same with Tom's, at Aunt Polly's request. Each lad had an income now that was simply prodigious, $1 for every weekday in the year and half of the Sundays. It was just what the minister got. No, it was what he was promised. He generally couldn't collect it. $1.25 a week would board, lodge, and school a boy in those old simple days, and clothe him and wash him too, for that matter. Judge Thatcher had conceived a great opinion of Tom. He said that no commonplace boy would ever have got his daughter out of that cave. When Becky told her father in strict confidence how Tom had taken her whipping at school, the judge was visibly moved, and when she pleaded grace for the mighty lie which Tom had told in order to shift that whipping from her shoulders to his own, the judge said what a fine outburst that it was. a noble, a generous, a magnanimous lie. A lie that was worthy to hold up its head and march down through history, abreast to breast with George Washington's lauded truth about the hatchet. Becky thought her father had never looked so tall and so superb as when he walked the floor and stamped his foot and said that. She went straight off and told Tom about it. Judge Thatcher hoped to see Tom a great lawyer or a great soldier someday. He said he meant to look to it that Tom should be admitted to the National Military Academy and afterward trained in the best law school in the country in order that he might be ready for either career or both. Huck Finn's wealth and the fact that he was now under the widow Douglas's protection introduced him into society. No, dragged him into it, hurled him into it, and his sufferings were almost more than he could bear. The widow's servants kept him clean and neat, combed and brushed, and they bedded him nightly in unsympathetic sheets that had not one little spot or stain which he could press to his heart and know for a friend. He had to eat with a knife and fork. He had to use a napkin, cup, and plate. He had to learn his book. He had to go to church. He had to talk so properly that speech was become insipid in his mouth. Whithersoever he turned, the bars and shackles of civilization shut him in and bound him hand and foot. He bravely bore his miseries 3 weeks, and then one day turned up missing. For 48 hours the widow hunted for him everywhere in great distress. The public were profoundly concerned. They searched high and low. They dragged the river for his body. Early the third morning, Tom Sawyer wisely went poking among some old empty hogsheads down behind the abandoned slaughterhouse, and in one of them he found the refugee. Huck had slept there. He had just breakfasted upon some stolen odds and ends of food and was lying off now in comfort with his pipe. He was unkempt, uncombed, and clad in the same old ruin of rags that had made him picturesque in the days when he was free and happy. Tom routed him out, told him the trouble he had been causing, and urged him to go home. Huck's face lost its tranquil content and took a melancholy cast. He said, "Don't talk about it, Tom. I've tried it, and it don't work. It don't work. Tom, it ain't for me. I ain't used to it. The widder's good to me and friendly, but I can't stand them ways. She makes me get up just at the same time every morning. She makes me wash. They comb me all to thunder. She won't let me sleep in the woodshed. I got to wear them blamed clothes that just smothers me. Tom, they don't seem to any air get through 'em somehow. And they're so rotten nice that I can't sit down, nor lay down, nor roll around anywheres. I hain't slid on a cellar door for, well, it appears to be years. I got to go to church and swear and sweat and sweat. I hate them ornery sermons. I can't catch a fly in there. I can't chaw. I got to wear shoes all Sunday. The widder eats by a bell. She goes to bed by a bell. She gets up by a bell. Everything's so awful regular, a body can't stand it." "Well, everybody does it that way, Huck." "Tom, it don't make no difference. I ain't everybody, and I can't stand it. It's awful to be tied up so, and grub comes too easy. I don't take no interest in victuals that way. I gotta ask to go a-fishing. I gotta ask to go in a-swimming. Darned if I ain't got to ask to do everything. Well, I got to talk so nice it wasn't no comfort. I'd got to go up in the attic and rip out a while every day to get a taste in my mouth, or I'd have died, Tom. The widow wouldn't let me smoke. She wouldn't let me yell. She wouldn't let me gape, nor stretch, nor scratch before folks. There was a spasm of special irritation and injury. And Dad fetch it, she prayed all the time. I never see such a woman. I had to shove, Tom. I just had to. And besides, that school's going to open, and I'd have had to go to it. Well, I wouldn't stand that, Tom. Looky here. Tom, being rich ain't what it's cracked up to be. It's just worry and sweat and a wishing you was dead all the time. Now these clothes suits me, and this barrel suits me, and I ain't ever going to shake 'em anymore, Tom. I would never got into all this trouble if it hadn't have been for that money. Now you just take my share of it along with yourn and give me a 10-center sometimes. Not many times, because I don't give a darn for a thing, though it's a tolerable hard to get. And you go and beg off for me with the widder. Oh, Huck, you know I can't do that. 'Tain't fair, and besides, if you'll try this thing just a while longer, you'll come to like it. Like it? Yes, the way I'd like a hot stove if I was to set on it long enough. No, Tom, I won't be rich, and I won't live in them cussed smothery houses. I like the woods and the river and hogsheads, and I'll stick to 'em, too. Blame it all. Just as we got guns in a cave and all just fixed to rob, here this darn foolishness has got to come up and spoil it all. Tom saw his opportunity. Looky here, Huck. Being rich ain't going to keep me back from turning robber. No? Oh, good licks. Are you in real deadwood earnest, Tom? Just as dead earnest as I'm sitting here. But, Huck, we can't let you into the gang if you ain't respectable, you know. Huck's joy was quenched. Can't let me in, Tom. Didn't you let me go for a pirate? Yeah, but that's different. A robber is more high-toned than what a pirate is, as a general thing. In most countries, they're awful high up in the nobility, dukes and such. Now, Tom, ain't you always been friendly to me? You wouldn't sheep me out, would you, Tom? You wouldn't do that now, would you, Tom? Huck, I wouldn't want to, and I don't want to. But what would people say? Why, they'd say, Tom Sawyer's gang, pretty low characters in it. They'd mean you, Huck. You wouldn't like that, and I wouldn't. Huck was silent for some time, engaged in a mental struggle. Finally he said, well, I'll go back to the widder's for a month and tackle it and see if I can come to stand it, if you'll let me belong to the gang, Tom. All right, Huck. It's a whiz. Come along, old chap. And I'll ask the widow to let up on you a little, Huck. Will you, Tom? Now, will you? That's good. If she let up on some of the roughest things, I'll smoke private and cuss private and crowd through or bust. When you going to start the gang and turn robbers? Oh, right off. We'll get the boys together and have the initiation tonight, maybe. Have the which? Have the initiation. What's that? It's to swear to stand by one another and never tell the gang secrets, even if you're chopped all to flinders, and kill anybody and all his family that hurts one of the gang. That's gay. That's mighty gay, Tom, I tell you. Well, I bet it is. And all that swearing's got to be done at midnight in the lonesomest, awfulest place you can find. A haunted house is the best, but they're all ripped up now. Well, midnight's good anyway, Tom. Yes, so it is. and you've got to swear on a coffin and sign it with blood. Now that's something like. Why, it's a million times bullier than pirating. I'll stick to the widder till I rot, Tom. And if I get to be a regular ripper of a robber and everybody's talking about it, I reckon she'll be proud she snaked me in out of the wet. Conclusion. So endeth this chronicle. It being strictly a history of a boy, it must stop here. The story could not go much further without becoming the history of a man. When one writes a novel about grown people, he knows exactly where to stop. That is, with a marriage, but when he writes of juveniles, he must stop where he best can. Most of the characters that perform in this book still live and are prosperous and happy. Someday it may seem worthwhile to take up the story of the younger ones again and see what sort of men and women they turned out to be. Therefore, it will be wisest not to reveal any of that part of their lives at present. That was a lot of fun. I hope everybody enjoyed hearing the story, and it is archived on my YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, search for Roarshock channel. You'll find the complete adventures of Tom Sawyer and many other, a lot of other material that I've uploaded there. And what a lot of fun. And who knows, there's still another 5 weeks before Periscope goes away. Maybe I'll read another book in that time. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.